The storm had rolled in slowly, like most things in the town of Granger Falls. Quiet, steady, without much fuss. The kind of rain that didn't just wet the ground, but whispered through the trees, soaked your clothes, and made everything feel a little heavier. In the middle of it, at the end of a gravel road fringed by pine trees and silence, lived Caleb Foster. Caleb was 39, a mechanic by trade, and a single dad by heartbreak. His wife, Naomi, had passed away 4 years ago in her sleep, an undiagnosed heart condition they never saw coming. Since then, Caleb had poured himself into raising his 11-year-old son, Jonah. The two of them shared a quiet rhythm, mornings filled with oatmeal and school drop-offs, evenings marked by homework, simple dinners, and falling asleep to old sci-fi reruns. Before we dive into this powerful true life-inspired story, take a moment to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps us share these life-changing emotional stories with others who need them. Now, get ready for a story that will touch your heart, stir your soul, and remind you that miracles often arrive disguised as mess. He hadn't looked for change, didn't need more noise. Life, though heavy with grief, was manageable, predictable. He kept his heart locked in the garage beside his tools, patched only by fatherhood and familiar routines. But that night, the rhythm broke. A knock came just after 8 p.m. Jonah was in the bath. The wind howled against the windows, and Caleb opened the door to find a woman standing in the rain with 5 children at her back. Her name was Elise. She looked no older than 36, but the lines on her face told stories no one should live through by that age. Her jacket was too thin, her shoes soaked. Her children, ranging from toddler to teen, clung to each other like leaves in a storm. They said nothing, but their eyes said everything. Elise spoke softly. She'd been staying with her in-laws since her husband died in a scaffolding collapse the previous summer. First, they were kind, then impatient, then cruel. When she refused to leave her youngest son in their custody, they told her to pack her things and go. That had been 3 days ago. Since then, she'd been living in a borrowed car that barely ran, trying not to freeze, trying to keep her children from knowing just how dire things were. They had pulled over near Caleb's place when the car finally gave out. She was looking for help, not handouts, just shelter for the night. Caleb stared at her for a moment too long. Everything in his body screamed that it was crazy to invite 6 strangers into his 2-bedroom cabin. But something deeper, older, moved him. He nodded. "Come in." That night, his living room transformed. Sleeping bags, borrowed blankets, mismatched socks drying by the fireplace. Jonah gave up his bed for the 2 youngest girls. Caleb made grilled cheese, and they ate in silence, except for the crackle of the fire and the occasional cough from the toddler, Noah. When everyone was finally asleep, Caleb sat in the kitchen, staring at the steam curling from his mug. He didn't know what he had just done, but the quiet in the house had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of breath, of life. The next morning was chaos. Spilled cereal, missing shoes, overlapping voices. Jonah looked unsure at first, but something in him shifted when he saw the toddler clinging to Caleb's pant leg. By the 3rd day, Elise had cleaned every corner of the kitchen. She found an old sewing kit and patched Jonah's worn-out jeans. The kids started calling Caleb Mr. C. Elise refused to be a burden. She insisted on helping. She cooked breakfast while Caleb prepped lunch for school. She taught her oldest, Harper, how to fold laundry in half the time. When Caleb came home from the garage, dinner was already bubbling on the stove, the smell of home drifting through rooms that had long smelled only of engine oil and dust. Neighbors noticed. Some whispered. Others brought extra groceries. Caleb didn't explain anything. He didn't know anyone a story. Weeks passed. Elise found part-time work at a local diner. Caleb started waking earlier to make room for 7 people in a bathroom built for 1. Jonah and the boys built a fort in the woods behind the house and called it Fort Foster. For the first time in years, Caleb laughed easily. His house was loud, messy, alive. Then came the twist. One night, Elise came home from work, her face pale. Caleb knew immediately something was wrong. She'd run into her brother-in-law at the diner. He hadn't seen her since the night she was cast out. He'd warned her they were filing for custody of Noah, the toddler. Claimed Elise was unstable, unfit. They had money, lawyers, and Elise had nothing but a borrowed roof and a part-time paycheck. Caleb's heart burned. Not just for Elise, for all of them. He made a decision. The next day he called a lawyer. He didn't have much, but he had enough. Enough to make a legal stand. Enough to put a temporary guardianship in place. Enough to say, "These kids are safe here." Elise cried when she found out. She tried to protest, but Caleb silenced her with a look only grief survivors recognize. A mix of fierce protection and quiet knowing. He'd once been helpless, watching his family slip away. He wouldn't do that again. The weeks that followed were tense. Papers were filed. Court dates set. Elise's in-laws hired a private investigator. They sent someone to take photos. They tried to prove the home was overcrowded, unsafe, but Granger Falls rallied. Teachers testified about the kids' progress. Neighbors vouched for Caleb's character. The diner owner wrote a letter about Elise's work ethic. The judge ruled in their favor. Temporary guardianship was granted. Elise could stay. The kids could stay. They celebrated with dollar store cupcakes and dancing in the kitchen. But just as they started to breathe again, a letter arrived. From the county. The house Caleb had lived in for 15 years was scheduled for rezoning and potential sale under a development program. Unless he could prove permanent residency for all current occupants, they had 60 days to vacate. Caleb sat on the porch that night, hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. Inside, Elise braided Harper's hair. Jonah read stories to the twins. Laughter filtered through the cracked window. He looked at them, all of them. They weren't just guests anymore. They were his. But now, if he couldn't find a solution, they'd all be out in the rain again. And Caleb had a secret, one he hadn't told anyone. Before Naomi died, they'd taken out a second mortgage. Medical bills had drained their savings. Caleb had defaulted once already. He was behind, way behind. And unless he could come up with $28,000 by the end of the month, they'd all lose everything. He hadn't told Elise. Not yet. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he didn't want her to carry one more thing. The storm that had brought her to his door was over, but another was coming, and this time it was headed straight for them. Before we pick up this incredible true life-inspired story, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. What you're about to hear is a powerful conclusion to a journey of unexpected family, resilience, and redemption. Let's finish the story of how one man's open door became a miracle for many. The night Caleb sat on his porch holding the overdue letter, a storm brewed inside him louder than any thunder outside. He watched through the window as the house buzzed with life. Harper finishing homework, Jonah teasing the twins with a flashlight game, Elise quietly folding laundry. He should have felt like home, but the truth clawed at him. He was out of time, behind on payments, facing rezoning, and with 7 people depending on him, Caleb didn't sleep much that night. He stared at the ceiling until the sun cracked over the horizon. When the alarm clock rang, he turned it off before it could wake anyone else and got to work. But this time, not just fixing cars. He made calls, dozens. Every number he could find for financial assistance, legal support, community outreach. Most led nowhere. Others offered sympathy with strings he couldn't untangle fast enough. But one call, a quiet lead from a retired pastor who heard the whispers of the rezoning, stood out. There was a grant, small, local, meant for preserving historic homes housing foster children or transitional families. The application was extensive. The deadline? For days. Caleb didn't tell Elise immediately. He worked by night, typing into an old laptop with sticky keys. He scanned documents at the library, filled out essays about purpose, intention, and legacy. He even asked Jonah to describe their new family in 3 words. Jonah said, loud, safe, whole. He included it. The final submission went through just before midnight on the 4th day. He hit send with trembling fingers. And then he waited. The days stretched long and uncertain. Elise sensed something. Her eyes searched Caleb's face more often. She didn't ask, not directly, but her hands lingered longer on his shoulder. Her gaze softened at night when the kids were asleep and the silence sat between them like a secret neither of them knew how to share. Then, one evening, she walked in from the front porch, where she'd been watching the stars, and said simply, "If you're carrying something alone, stop. Let me help carry it." And so he did. He told her everything. The default, the threat of losing the home, the grant. Elise listened without panic. She took his hand and said, "Whatever happens, we face it together." It was the first time he truly believed that he wasn't alone. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. The grant had been approved. Caleb stared at the envelope, rereading the lines again and again. A $30,000 preservation award. Enough to pay off the overdue balance, make minor renovations, and register the home under the protection clause that would prevent forced rezoning for 10 years. He didn't speak, just handed the letter to Elise. She read it, eyes widening. Then she looked at him, smiled. That night, they celebrated with pancakes for dinner and root beer floats in chipped mugs. The kids danced around the living room to music from Caleb's old stereo, and when Noah spilled an entire cup of syrup on the couch, no one even blinked. That's how far they had come. But the story didn't end there, because building a home isn't just about four walls. It's about forgiveness, about healing, and sometimes about facing the ghosts we left behind. Spring turned to summer. Elise's oldest, Harper, began writing poetry. Her middle son, Jesse, joined the soccer team with Jonah. The twins helped Elise plant a garden in the side yard. Tomatoes, sunflowers, hope. One afternoon, while tending the garden, Elise got a phone call from a blocked number. Her face changed. She handed the phone to Caleb. It was her in-law's lawyer. They were requesting a meeting, not to fight, to apologize. Caleb met with them at a local diner, alone. They were older than he imagined, worn down. The woman, Elise's mother-in-law, cried softly while her husband spoke. They had lost their son and in their grief, reacted in fear. They thought they could control what came next. They'd seen Elise's resilience in the court case and had quietly followed her progress. When news of the grant approval hit the local paper, they realized something. She wasn't weak. She was stronger than they ever gave her credit for. They didn't ask for anything, just a chance to meet their grandchildren again. Slowly, with trust, Caleb agreed to talk with Elise. When she found out, she was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded, one step at a time. Healing started in coffee shop meetings and Sunday park visits. No expectations, just presence. And while old wounds didn't vanish, they stopped bleeding. Meanwhile, Caleb returned to the garage part-time. He built a workbench in the backyard for Jonah, who had taken an interest in fixing bikes. Elise expanded her hours at the diner, eventually getting promoted to assistant manager. One evening, the town hosted its annual Founders Festival. It was a big deal for a small place. Music, booths, contests. Caleb didn't plan to attend, but Jonah begged. So he packed up the kids, folding chairs, sandwiches, and a cooler full of lemonade. At the festival, a local reporter approached them, asked to feature their family in a community spotlight. Caleb hesitated, but Elise smiled and said yes. A week later, the story hit the front page. Mechanic opens door to widow and 5 kids, builds a home from scratch. The article went viral in the region. Donations poured into the grant fund, and the family was invited to speak at the state foster care awareness event. Caleb stood on that stage in a borrowed suit, hands shaking, with Elise and the children by his side. He didn't say much, just this. Opening my door that night wasn't an act of charity. It was instinct. I thought I was helping a stranger survive the storm. I didn't know I was inviting in the very thing that would save me. The room stood in silence. Then applause. Loud, thunderous applause. Afterward, as the family drove home in the same old pickup truck, the twins sleeping in the back seat and Jonah humming some tune on the radio, Caleb reached over and took Elise's hand. She looked at him. "You okay?" He nodded. Yeah, I think I am. In the months that followed, they didn't talk much about what they were. They didn't need to. Love lived in the daily things. In the way Elise left notes in his lunchbox. In how Caleb carved each child's name into the treehouse they built that summer. In the late nights watching the stars, fingers barely touching. Then one September evening, Jonah ran into the kitchen, holding a note from school. It was about a writing contest. What family means to me. Each child entered. A week later, Caleb found the entries on the table, paper still warm from the printer. Harper wrote about courage. Jesse wrote about safe places. The twins drew a rainbow with 8 stick figures under it. But Jonah's essay stopped him. It read, "Family is not who you start with. It's who stays when it gets messy." Mr. C didn't know us when he opened the door. He had no reason to, but he did. Now we're not 2 families anymore. We're just one. Loud, safe, whole. Caleb folded the paper, tears slipping silently down his cheek, and he realized finally, fully, what they had built together. A family not by blood, but by choice. Not by tradition, but by grace. That winter, they hosted their first family Christmas. Neighbors brought dishes. The in-laws brought ornaments. Jonah hung a wooden sign above the mantel, carved by Harper. Love lives here, and that's how it stayed. Not perfect, not always easy, but full and true. The miracle didn't come in lightning or fireworks. It came in the form of a woman with soaked shoes and 5 children in need of warmth. It came in grilled cheese at midnight, courtrooms with shaking hands, garden tomatoes, and sleepy porch talks. It came in Caleb's willingness to say yes to something inconvenient, uncomfortable, and unknown. And in return, life gave him everything. Because sometimes, the family you're meant to have is the one that finds you in the middle of your quiet life and fills it with noise, laughter, healing, and meaning. Sometimes your daily miracle starts with a knock on the door. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or reminded you of what love truly looks like, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. These real-life inspired stories deserve to be told. And someone out there may need this reminder that family isn't always about blood. It's about choosing to love loudly, daily, and forever. Until next time, stay open, stay kind, and never underestimate the power of one open door.